Thanks all for coming out. Can everyone hear me okay in the back? Yeah. Everyone can see okay? Well, not right now, but now everyone can see okay, yes? Excellent. So I'm going to be talking about, last time I was here, I think I sort of did the history of creationism up until whenever that was, 2 or 3 years ago. And so mostly, some of you weren't here, and that's fine. I'm not going to assume that anyone, there's not going to be a quiz or anything. But just updating you on what we've been doing at NCSC in the last few years, especially since the trial in Dover that was basically the end of intelligent design creationism. So what comes next? And to understand this, just start off with what intelligent design was. Really something that came in the mid to late 1980s. And that, like I say, the Dover trial in 2005 was pretty much the end of. And here you see the logo for the Center for Renewal of Science and Culture, as it was called then, for the Discovery Institute. At some point, they realized that this picture here of, you've got Michelangelo's God reaching down and creating DNA rather than Adam. At some point, it occurred to them that that could conceivably be perceived as possibly a religious sort of symbol, and that if they were trying to push this idea in schoolrooms, that perhaps that would be a problem. So they changed the name and they changed the logo. It's now the Center for Science and Culture. They dropped the word renewal. And now you've just got a picture of the Constitution and the Vitruvian Man and DNA, and the DNA base pairs that they have on here don't quite match, but that's all right. That's basically the idea of what intelligent design was all about. It was the same creationist ideas that people had been talking about for decades before, but take out the explicit references to who the designer was. It was just some designer somewhere at some point did something that they're not going to specify. They're not going to specify when. The Earth might be 6,000 years old. It might be 4.5 billion years old. Let's not get hung up on details, really. And that was the argument. And it was, in many ways, a reaction to a 1987 court case that said you couldn't require the teaching of creation science in public school classrooms. So this came to its own test in 2005 when a school board in Dover, Pennsylvania, passed a policy requiring teachers to read a short statement saying that evolution, sure, it's in the science standards and we have to teach it, but we don't feel good about it. And students should be made aware that there are other theories like intelligent design out there. And also, there is this textbook available for anyone who's interested in learning more about intelligent design. Available in the classrooms, teachers didn't have to use it. Well, the teacher said, no, we're not going to read this statement because it's nonsense. And a bunch of parents sued because they said, this is just creationism and you're not going to teach my kids religion in public schools, right? And in the course of the trial, the early drafts of Pandas and People came out as part of the discovery process. And it was possible to do word counts on them and really show where intelligent design came from, at least in terms of Pandas and People. So in the early drafts, which go back to 1983, when the book was called Creation Biology, if you do a word count on things like creationism or creationist, that's the red dot at the top, you see there's about one reference per page to creationism or creationist or something like that, and basically nothing to the blue dot there, intelligent design. And that continues on through early 1987, when, as you recall, later that year, there was a Supreme Court ruling that said you couldn't require the teaching of creation science. So all of a sudden, there's a switch. And what they basically did was just did a search and replace and took all of the references to creationism or creation science or whatever and changed them to intelligent design or some reference to design. And after the trial, looking through that first 1987 draft after the ruling, you can actually find this passage that had said creationists accept the latter view. They wanted to change it to design proponents accept the latter view, but they just missed it a little bit, so it wound up becoming could design proponentsists accept the latter view. This is the missing link in the evolution of intelligent design. And the judge looked at this and looked at testimony from NCSC's board members, historians, theologians, experts in pedagogy, science. A whole bunch of people looked at it and said, this is not science. This is just another form of creationism. It's religion. It can't be properly taught in public school science classes. And that's basically been the end of intelligent design as a, there are still people talking about it, but you don't see it showing up as something people necessarily are pushing for in classrooms anymore. But the history of creationism is basically what this illustrates. For those of you who can't see it at the back, you've got creationism, a monkey that has creationism on it, then another one that says creation science, another that says intelligent design. And these folks here in the Committee to Get Religion into Science classroom says, we're not making a lot of progress. It's renaming the same old ideas over and over again. And that's still what we've seen since 2005 across the country. Anti-evolution activity of one form or another, whether it's in local school boards or state boards of education or state legislatures, 48 states and 19 countries around the world, the two exceptions being South Dakota and Hawaii. And anyone who thinks that South Dakota is some bastion of great evolution education, I've got a Bigfoot ranch to sell you. A lot of what we know is self-reported. Parents call us or teachers call us and say, this is what's happening, what should I do about it? And so the fact that we haven't heard anything from South Dakota is mostly just a reflection of the fact that if it's whatever's happening in South Dakota, no one in the community minds. And the same thing is probably true in Hawaii as well. And right now, a lot of the relabeling that we've seen, a lot of the shift, instead of talking about intelligent design, which is a badly tarnished brand after Dover, we're seeing the rise of euphemisms. So it's some of these things are stuff that we've heard for decades. Teach, evolution as a theory, not as a fact. Or critically analyze evolution. Teach the evidence for and against. Teach the strengths and weaknesses. These sorts of things, all of which are basically ways of teaching non-science in the name of fairness. And it seems so reasonable. Of course we should critically analyze ideas. Of course we should present the strengths and weaknesses of ideas. I mean, what could be wrong with that? The problem is that the arguments that they want to present as weaknesses, that they want to present as critical analysis, are still the same warmed over ideas that intelligent design advocates had proposed, that creation science advocates had proposed before that, and that folks like William Jennings Bryan were proposing 85 years ago in the Scopes trial. We saw some of this in 1987 when the creation science laws were struck down. This was a comment that the lawyer for the state of Louisiana in that case, who also happened to be the staff attorney for the Institute for Creation Research, he put forward this policy statement after the Supreme Court ruling that said, well, okay, we lost this, and until we get this ruling overturned, what we're going to have to do is teach the evidence and arguments against evolution, even if teachers don't choose to recognize those as arguments for creationism, which he certainly did. After the Dover trial, the Discovery Institute put out a pretty similar comment saying, we should have administrative guidelines, perhaps even legislative enactments, to provide clearer protection for the rights of students to critically analyze Darwin's theory. And the arguments, again, that they wanted to use in that critical analysis were the same things that they had presented as intelligent design in the years before. One of the places where we've seen this happen is in Texas, where starting in the late 90s, they had a policy on the books in all of the science standards, in biology, in physics, and chemistry, that said students should learn the strengths and weaknesses of scientific theories. When they were doing textbook adoption in 2003, and Texas textbook adoption is a big deal because the state of Texas buys more textbooks than anyone else in the Western Hemisphere. So the publishers pay close attention to what their policies are. So when they were doing textbook adoption, the only scientific theory that they were asking the publishers to include weaknesses of was evolution. And so when the time came to revise those science standards, starting in 2008 and through 2009, that language about strengths and weaknesses became an issue. You had Barney there lobbying the State Board of Education, asking, how old am I, 4,000 or 64 million years old? We went there with Professor Steve, the Panda's Thumb mascot, to lobby the State Board of Education. We went with a statement signed by 60 scientific societies, asking them to adopt the standards as written by their expert committees, and to not bring in, to leave the language about strengths and weaknesses out, to not introduce attacks on evolution. Here I was lobbying Cynthia Dunbar, who is a little bit wacky. In a book that she wrote, while a member of the State Board of Education, mind you, she wrote that the establishment of public schools is unconstitutional and even tyrannical.
This is Texas?
This is Texas, yes. Texas politics are fun. Panda thought bubbles are in black and white, obviously. So ultimately, the compromise language that they came up with instead of strengths and weaknesses was students should learn the evidence, examine all sides of scientific evidence. Now, I don't know what that means. Evidence is not the sort of thing that we generally think of as having sides. It just is what it is. But that's what the language is. And right now they don't have money to buy textbooks in Texas. It's not often that I'm glad to see public schools being underfunded. But in this case, I'm willing to make an exception. So they're going to be adopting supplements to textbooks. We haven't seen what those look like yet. For a while, the publisher of Pandas and People was talking about having their own supplement that they were going to submit, but they've pulled out of it. In addition to this language, that again is in all of the science standards, it's in biology, it's in chemistry. I don't know how they think that they're going to present examine all sides of the evidence for gravity, but that's what they've committed to. They also included specific attacks on sciences, including language requiring teaching of different theories about the structure, scale, and origin of the universe, a line about sudden appearance of new species in the fossil record, and in the environmental science standards, evidence for and against the existence of global warming is supposed to be taught. And so in defense of this, and in opposition to, among other things, the statements that we brought to them, I don't know if my cell phone is doing that, but I guess not.
A scientific experiment
right there, in front of our very eyes. Unsuccessful, but there it is.
Divine intervention.
Perhaps. So Don McElroy, who was then the chairman of the State Board of Education, had could get annoying. I don't know, do you think it could be the mic?
I don't think so. It just started. I mean, it's the
Yeah. Yeah. Well, another experiment. Try it on this side. So Don McElroy, who was the chairman at the time, defended these amendments and said, explained why they didn't want to listen to the advice that we had brought from the scientific societies. He said this.
It's not complicated. It doesn't take mathematics. I disagree with these experts. Somebody's got to stand up to experts.
Someone's got to stand up to experts. There it is. And that's what they did. They passed these standards. They're on the books. We'll see what comes ultimately of the textbook adoption process and the supplements that they're doing this year. The other place where we're seeing this sort of euphemistic language and the same style of attack is in bills that have been filed in over a dozen states. So in the last few years, 36 different bills, 6 of them just this year, promising academic freedom for teachers and for students who want to disagree with the established scientific view around these issues, which in the context of higher education, a college professor, a college student, graduate students, makes complete sense. The idea that high school students are in a position necessarily to be challenging the mainstream scientific views is a little bit more questionable. And the way that these are phrased, it's the same sorts of euphemistic language that we've described before. The only of these bills that's passed so far is in Louisiana in 2008. One just on Friday, I think, was introduced in Tennessee. And the language is often pretty similar to the one in Louisiana. Here you have it saying that we want to promote critical thinking skills, logical analysis, and open and objective discussion of scientific theories, and singling out evolution as well as global warming. And here it talks about human cloning. In some cases, that's often a sort of code word for stem cell research. It also says, nothing in this bill should be construed to be about religion, which is the sort of thing that if you're a judge reviewing a law like this, makes you very suspicious that they bothered to include that disclaimer. And it says that once teachers have presented the standard content from the textbook, that they're allowed to bring in whatever supplemental textbooks they might choose. In general, this is something that teachers could already do, and hopefully they were already teaching critical thinking and so forth. So it's not clear what this bill allows that wasn't allowed before, but it certainly draws a big red circle around evolution and says this thing that is subject to a public controversy, a political controversy, should be treated as scientifically controversial in the classroom. And that's where things get problematic. The language about supplements also gets tricky because the Louisiana Family Forum, that was the main sponsor of this bill, publishes a series of supplements. These are meant as addenda. They describe them as addenda to standard textbooks. In this case, you've got a discussion of fish fossils that could only have been, they must have been buried within a few days after the fish died for fossilization to be possible. The fossilization implies violent burial. Normal floodwaters do not produce fossils unless there's a sudden surge of water. When the billions of fossils that are everywhere are considered in this light, Earth's history had to have some very violent floods, they say. They're thinking, I think, of one flood in particular. And the fact that they cite the author of Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, further supports that idea. They also, in talking about the fossil of Lucy, the Australopithecus, they here say that, oh, a bunch of scientists think that Lucy's fossil is probably just a pygmy chimpanzee, citing, among others, a guy named Malcolm Bowden, whose name I didn't immediately recognize when I was looking through this. So if you put his name into Google, one of the first results you come up with is here from JesusIsLord.com, Basic Scientific Arguments for Geocentricity. He's described in the addendum as an evolutionist. I think not. I think not. So this is the sort of thing that Louisiana Family Forum would like to see in public schools. Other people take a different angle on it. There was a textbook that was almost adopted in Florida, ultimately was adopted after some revisions, but a reviewer noticed that there was a 2-page spread talking about the origin and development of life, which includes a lot of standard creationist lines, including some just flat out wrong descriptions of basic scientific terminology. Here it's talking about natural selection, which it defines a process that is clearly recognizable, at least, as natural selection, but which they describe as microevolution or genetic drift. Genetic drift being an entirely different scientific process. Later on, they say genetic drift is well documented. They mean natural selection. Selective breeding that produces different types of dogs and horses demonstrates it clearly. Virtually all scientists accept genetic drift as valid, but general evolution, or macroevolution as they describe it further up on the page, is mainstream in biology, but not universally accepted among all scientists. Well, not sure that I would agree with that. But they also then start parroting standard things that you can find the same arguments in Pandas and People and elsewhere, saying the fossil record does not contain the many transitional species one would expect. This is the same as the Texas standards about sudden appearance in the fossil record. And then they talk about general evolution, macroevolution doesn't explain how a complex structure like the eye could come into existence through random mutations. This is an objection that Darwin addressed in The Origin of Species 152 years ago. Yet somehow the authors of this marine science textbook missed out on that. Ultimately, the publisher agreed to remove these passages, and textbooks and classrooms in Florida in marine science classrooms will still be able to use this. Other supplements are out there, obviously of Pandas and People, which I've got a copy of here. Of Pandas and People, since the Dover trial, has been pretty badly discredited, so we can say that that's extinct. But it was replaced, not enough hands here, yes. I will take audience participation. So on the top there, you've got a book called The Design of Life, which is the third edition of Pandas and People. You've also got a copy of Pandas and People there, which you can hold up. And you can see that Of Pandas and People is almost exactly half the length of The Design of Life. The authors are different. Pandas and People is attributed to Davis and Kenyon. Dembski and Wells are the credited authors of these two. But I'll take them both, actually, just to. They're in, for instance, the passage that gives the book its name, where it talks about Of Pandas and People. There's a section in both books, which almost the same title. Not exactly the same, but close enough. In Of Pandas and People, it's called The Puzzling Panda. In The Design of Life, it's The Puzzling Pandas, plural. And the first sentences are basically identical. In Of Pandas and People, the giant panda and the lesser or red panda present us with an eloquent illustration of the problems with homologous and analogous structures. Here in The Design of Life, the giant panda and the lesser or red panda illustrate the problems of distinguishing homologous and analogous structures. And it goes on like that, making pretty much the same argument all along, until it gets to the section of Pandas and People is called a living mosaic, and in Design of Life is common design, common ancestry, or both. The theories of intelligent design and natural descent both have an explanation for why living things share common structures, and since both theories are able to account for similarities, the sheer existence of similarities cannot count as evidence for or against either theory. Yet there is more to consider, and that is the erratic patchwork pattern of similarities. That's from Of Pandas and People. In the Design of Life, theories of intelligent design and materialistic evolution offer an explanation for why living things share common features. And since both theories are able to account for similarities, the sheer existence of similarities cannot count as evidence for or against either theory. There is more to consider, and that is the erratic patchwork pattern of similarities. It's the same argument. It's the same intelligent design argument. They've padded it out to twice the length, but it's still the same basic gist. And this book is now being marketed more as a college resource for the courses in intelligent design that no one is teaching. And in the market that Of Pandas and People had occupied as a high school supplement, we've got the book Explore Evolution, which you can see is about the same form factor. It's almost exactly the same length as Of Pandas and People. I think it's 10 pages shorter. And the subtitle is now The Arguments For and Against Neo-Darwinism. So it's that same euphemistic language, the same language that the ICR was putting out after the 1987 court case, saying let's teach the arguments against evolution even if no one will accept them as arguments for creationism. Teachers might fill in the blanks, students might be able to fill in the blanks on their own, but the basic gist is to present a sort of potted and inaccurate account of what evolution says, and then knock down the straw man. So for instance, here's from the teachers' PowerPoint slides that they provide, a slide about Darwin talking about some of the same issues that the marine science textbook mentioned. How can a complex organ could have evolved if not by if we couldn't find a way that it evolved through numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. What this slide doesn't say on it is the very next sentence, which is, but I can find no such case. And he then goes on to explain how he would go about explaining the origin of these complex organs. Leaving that out is a big problem. And when they're talking about the fossil record, it's the same sudden appearance sort of argument in the fossil record. All of a sudden, we have all of these things in the Cambrian. What they don't talk about is that most of those fossils, we can today recognize them perhaps as early representatives of the major phyla that we see around us today. But at the time, they were all more or less worms of one sort or another that may have had particular defining characteristics that made them seem unique. But the idea that this is a challenge to common ancestry is sort of silly. To the extent that they argue for anything, it's against this single tree of life that they show there, against a single tree of life, and in favor of what they describe as an orchard of trees. And they cite various real scientists in support of this, even though none of them would talk about an orchard. None of them have this idea of a bunch of trees completely separate from one another. And the very word orchard here I find interesting, because if you say there are a bunch of trees out there are a bunch of trees of life, is a group of trees automatically an orchard, or would you call it a forest, or woods, or a grove, perhaps? An orchard is something that's tended, it's something that's planted, it's something that's designed and cared for by some intelligent agent, right? So they're still arguing for that same thing, and indeed the only place that I've been able to locate anyone talking about an orchard model of life is here in a paper from the International Conference on Creationism, where young Earth creationist Kurt Wise argues against the single tree of life and in favor here of the neo-creationist orchard, as he refers to it. So to the extent that Explore Evolution is arguing for anything, it's still the same creationist arguments that we've seen since at least the 1980s. And the people that they cite in support of this actually argue for something that looks much more like this, where down at the base of the tree of life, 2 billion years ago or so, you had all of these different lineages that were swapping genes and that were engulfing each other, and the origin of the mitochondria that we have in our cells. At this time, things were just so mixed up that it's hard to disentangle them. And that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about an orchard. They're talking about a tangled bank. Other people have taken a different approach. Instead of trying to get things into the classrooms, you've got guys like Ray Comfort who tried to get around the science teachers entirely. Ray Comfort is most famous for this.
Behold the atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges. On the close side, 2 ridges. If you get your hand ready to grip a banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 grooves, on the close side 2 grooves. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents. Green, too early; yellow, just right; black, too late.
That's Kirk Cameron sitting next to him, by the way.
You'll find, as with a soda can makers, placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable, has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. Easy to digest. And it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier. Seriously, Jeff, the whole of creation testifies to the genius of God's creative art.
I mean, how can you argue against that, really? It was not from The Onion. He made that argument. He has since retracted at least parts of that, but the basic argument he continues to hold up. So his idea was, on the 150th anniversary of the publication of The Origin, he would issue, the Origin of Species is, of course, in public domain now, so he issued his own special edition of The Origin of Species. Back to the problem of trying to navigate things all at once. That he had his volunteers hand out copies of this for free on college campuses all over the country, and I think in Canada too. It turns out that the volunteers had to buy these things in bulk, which was not necessarily the best deal for them, but they showed up and handed them out, and we thought that was great, because everyone should have a copy of The Origin of Species, and if someone's going to hand it to you for free, then so much the better. Early editions of it, he left out a few chapters, which we didn't like, but he added them back for the big handout, but he added this noxious introduction to the thing where he spends a while attacking Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam for reasons that aren't really clear, and also says, in promoting the idea that humans were merely animals and accidents of nature, the natural consequence of Darwinism was to overturn the traditional Judeo-Christian values on the sacredness of human life. The legacy of Darwin's theory can be seen in the rise of eugenics, euthanasia, racism, infanticide, and abortion. So we didn't think anyone should have to read that, because that's nonsense. And he gets the history wrong, he gets basic facts wrong. So what everyone needs is a bookmark to separate the bananas from the science. So we made these up and sent them around to the college campuses where the handout was being done, so that everyone could just insert it directly at page 59, and always open to a section after that, and you're going to get the good science and not have to worry about the craziness. Similar arguments here. I'll pass this around if anyone wants to look at it. Similar arguments were made by Ben Stein in his movie Expelled in 2008, where this was in an interview that he did. In the movie, he visits concentration camps and says, oh, look how Darwin was responsible for the Holocaust. And here he is defending that on an interview with Trinity Broadcast Network, saying the last time any of my relatives saw scientists telling what to do, they were telling them to go to the showers to get gassed. That's where science leads you. The host agrees with him. He says, love of God and compassion and empathy leads you to a very glorious place, and science leads you to killing people. The Anti-Defamation League took issue with this, issuing a statement saying that Expelled misappropriates the Holocaust, that Hitler didn't need Darwin to devise his heinous plan, and using the Holocaust to tarnish those who promote the theory of evolution is outrageous and trivializes the complex factors that led to the mass extermination of European Jewry. Ben Stein was asked about this by a reviewer in Canada and responded that the Holocaust is none of the ADL's effing business. He's a class act. So aside from these sorts of big national things, Expelled opened on 1,000 screens on its first weekend. It's, I think, the 6th highest grossing political documentary in history, or to the extent that we can call it a documentary. But most of what comes through NCSE is not big high-profile things like this. It's individual teachers in a classroom or an individual parent. And we know from a survey that 1 in 8 high school science teacher spends at least an hour advocating for creationism. The same survey found that 6 in 10 teachers minimize their coverage of evolution. And that's a hard trend to break, because we're in a global economy. Biology and the biological sciences are the center of the 21st century economy. And so this is our challenge. How do we compete with that in a world without teaching them science? And already we're falling behind. This is a survey from 2006, 35 industrialized nations. The United States came in number 34 out of 35, ahead of Turkey, but behind scientific powerhouses like Cyprus and Slovenia, which is not where we want to be. And interestingly, Turkey is one of the few other countries out there that has an active creationist movement. Organized a lot of it around this guy Harun Yahya, which is a pen name for a guy who has gotten in various interesting scrapes over the years, runs this organization called the BAV, the Scientific Research Foundation, that publishes, among other things, this tome, which I don't know if you can see it here, but it's got to weigh 15, 20 pounds easily. It's got a nice hologram on the cover here that you can see. It's all three-dimensional on the back. He's got a nice 3D hologram picture of himself. Very classy. I mean, this thing cost a bunch of money to produce, and he sent copies of this to, as far as we can tell, basically every biology professor in the United States, I think in Canada, and throughout Europe in various languages. So the cost of just shipping these, not even of producing them, is enormous. Hundreds of thousands of copies of this that were sent out. And the inside, it's all full color, glossy pages. Crazy thing. He didn't have to pay anything for rights on all of the pictures he used. He just sort of stole them from the best sources, including some pictures. A lot of it is dedicated to contrasting fossils with modern species that look exactly the same. So this is the same sudden appearance in the fossil record type argument. And in some cases, the modern representative that he uses are actually photographs of fishing lures. There are people who love making really detailed fishing lures that look exactly like the actual insect. And so you can see the hook. I don't know if he thought it was an ovipositor or something, but there it is. So in the course of this, and we can pass this around too, 2 hands though. Lift with your knees, not with your back. He makes the sort of standard creationist arguments. The evolution is outdated. Scientists have no offer and response in the face of the fossil record, which deals a severe blow. He says that violent ideologies like racism, fascism, communism, and other cruel worldviews based on conflict have all drawn strength from evolution. And he says that the truth revealed by science is that the theory of evolution is wrong, and the universe and living things are the creation of God. So a lot of this is actually probably translated from American creationist work, translated into Turkish, edited, then translated back into English and sent out, and also translated into a dozen or so other languages. And each of these books are available in all of those translations as PDFs for free on his website, as well as at subsidized prices from in print. Where the money comes from, no one's quite sure, but he has been quite successful at intimidating Turkish scientists into basically not actively defending evolution in classrooms. He and his group mounted a campaign of defamation and other things. And I say defamation because I was actually convicted of defamation in the course of this. But Turkish scientists are afraid basically to stand up for themselves anymore. We're also seeing an expansion of the same style of argument that we saw around evolution, not just into other countries. There are also active creationist movements in Australia. There seems to be a growing creationist movement in a lot of Latin America as well. We're also seeing this rhetoric showing up in things like global warming, where last year the South Dakota legislature passed this resolution. They wound up amending it slightly from this version, but I like this one better for reasons that will become clear. A resolution that called for balanced teaching of global warming. This is the same language that creationists used in the 1980s. We want a balanced treatment of evolution and creation science. It says that there's no evidence of atmospheric warming in the troposphere. It says that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant, but is a highly beneficial ingredient for all plant life on Earth. So don't worry. Global warming is a scientific theory, not a fact. same rhetoric that they're using around creationism. And of course, there are climatological, meteorological, astrological, thermological, cosmological, and ecological dynamics that are not being adequately accounted for. So I don't know whether the recent discovery of a 13th zodiac sign changes any of this, but there it is. And that was passed. It's a non-binding resolution, but still a pretty strong statement from South Dakota, which is, again, the only state, one of the two states that we don't have any reports on anti-evolution activity. Again, not because it's not happening. It's just that the parents and teachers aren't calling us. So for all that, how do I get up in the morning, right? This is a pretty depressing picture that I've told. So why am I optimistic? Well, first of all, in all of the court cases and in most of the policy fights, we always win. Whether it's starting after the Scopes trial, at least, where Scopes lost and was convicted of teaching evolution, but Susan Epperson won her case and overturned those Scopes series laws in a Supreme Court case in 1968. In 1981 and again in 1987, creation science was struck down. Through a series of court cases in the 1990s, a lot of intelligent design arguments were struck down by lower courts and ultimately really given their death blow in 2005. And since then, there really hasn't been a big court case. I actually haven't had an opportunity to testify and don't know that I necessarily would want to, but when it comes to court, we always win, and that's cause for optimism. It's also important to know that the quality of science standards has been improving. This is a survey that was done of science standards in 2000 by the Fordham Foundation, which is a politically conservative group. This was done largely by Lawrence Lerner, who lives here in the Bay Area. And you don't have to worry about the finer details here, but do note here in the Southeast, a whole lot of Fs. When we replicated this study in 2010, you see a lot of those Fs go away. The total number of Fs goes from five Fs in 2010 down from 13 F or F minuses in 2000. The F minus was during the brief period when Kansas had some really bad anti-evolution science standards on the books, which never took effect, it should be noted. I mean, that decision was reversed before it affected anything in classrooms. But note that we see a lot more, no more A's, but a lot more B's, a lot more C's in 2010 than we saw in 2000. And so that's progress.
Is that great?
No, it's the same standards that were applied in 2000. And the other thing that's encouraging about this is that younger teachers especially, are paying more attention to what's in the standards. So as the standards are improving, there are more teachers in the classrooms who are looking to those standards for guidance. Some discussion of evolution occurs in every state's standards now, which was not always the case. I'm also optimistic because the science itself keeps getting stronger. We get new fossil discoveries, early bats that teach us how mammals first learned to fly, early tetrapods, Tiktaalik, that teach us how the first fish started being able to walk around on land, early turtles that have a shell on the bottom but not on their back, showing us how that transition worked. And here we have an early hominid fossil showing us how the lineage that led to humans acquired the various unique traits that we associate with ourselves. We also have theoretical advances, new ideas around the way that we can incorporate our understanding of developmental biology into an understanding of evolution. So here you can see patterns of skull development where genes get turned on at various points in the development of the organism and how those vary between, here we have mammals, crocodiles, turtles, lizards, and what that tells us about evolution. And by understanding that in modern species, we can go back to fossil species and say, okay, this trait that we know is associated with this gene being turned on or turned off, that occurs here in the fossil record. 300 million years ago, that's when this gene changed. It's a remarkable thing that we're able to do. And a lot of people see this as a step towards a new synthesis, something extending the modern synthesis that was established in the 1940s. At the same time, you've got folks like Craig Venter, not just doing whole genome sequencing on a scale that, I mean, in 10 years, it'll be a $50 test that your doctor will do. The rate at which this is getting faster and cheaper and easier to do is amazing. And we're also able to start taking that knowledge, taking those whole genome sequences, and design a genome and insert it into a cell. So this is something Craig Venter did, creating a cell essentially from scratch. It's a remarkable thing to be able to do, and we don't even know everything that will result from that sort of discovery. But we can insert genes that allow us to do biofuels, that allow us to produce new medicines cheaply and easily. At the same time that people are redefining how we think about life today, researchers are pushing back our understanding of the earliest forms of life by having RNA enzymes, little strands of RNA that are able to replicate themselves, that are able to evolve in the test tube. And this is, to our best understanding, this is what the earliest life was like. So we're getting close to reconstructing that early life and being able to identify what life on other planets might be like if it follows a similar course to life on Earth. And researchers are coming up with artificial biochemistries. They're creating nucleic acids that, instead of having the 5-carbon ring that nucleic acids have here, producing them with 6-carbon rings and seeing, does that work? Is that something that we might find on other planets instead of the 5-carbon rings that we have? And again, expanding our understanding of what life means and how life could have evolved. And fields outside of biology are bringing in evolutionary concepts. People in finance, hedge funds, are using evolutionary algorithms to improve the way that they invest money, which before the stock market crash was a much more impressive story to tell, I gotta say. You've got pharmaceutical developers using their understanding of the evolutionary history of life to find new sources of drugs and sources that are easy for existing drugs, sources that are easier to extract from, that have less environmental impact, and finding new drugs to treat diseases from cancer to a host of other things. Oncologists are using their understanding of human evolution to understand, why do we get cancer in the first place, and to get better ideas about how to short-circuit that process, and also to understand how cancers evolve resistance to chemotherapies inside the body. Electrical engineers are using evolutionary algorithms to improve everything from the ubiquitous thumb drive, which here you can see evolving camouflage. And folks at the NASA Ames facility in the South Bay, or in the Evolvable Systems group, have used similar techniques to develop antennae that work better than anything that you can design from first principles. An antenna like this one is being tested out on a satellite right now for use on a future Mars mission. And cosmologists are using these ideas to improve our understanding of why the universe has the laws that it has. It's a remarkable progress that we're making, that evolution is opening up doors for us. And so that's why I'm optimistic, and that's why I get up every morning to work at the crisis clinic there at NCSE. My colleagues, the boss, Jeannie Scott, our deputy director, Glenn Branch, my colleague Steve Newton, Peter Hess, our staff theologian, Eric Mickle, an anthropologist, and Robert Lunn, who you can see here, our communications director. We are, as one person who should not have gotten the fundraising letter that this was sent back to, we are the dirty bastards responsible for shoving that liberal BS down your kids' throats. Thanks, and if you've got any questions.